Hello, my name is Tamala Jones, and for my critical thinking topic, I will be doing a scenario analysis. I'm a prospective elementary school teacher, and I would like to teach third grade. The question that I am proposing for this project is if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does the tree still make a sound? So, this has always been an interesting critical thinking topic for me, and I think that it would be a fun one to introduce to third grade students just to get into their minds and kind of see how they would think about this topic. So, I was initially introduced to this topic in middle school. I would say probably in like the sixth or seventh grade. But as I stated, I think it would be an interesting topic to explore with third graders just to get their um, critical thinking skills, moving. The three different stances that I believe one could take on this question is yes, no, and maybe. Maybe as in like it could potentially be possible or probable, but not really sure if it's going to be a yes or no. So maybe as in like it could be possible, but who knows? So as far as my assumptions, I believe I stand more on the side of yes and also maybe because I take a stance where I believe that even though someone isn't around to necessarily hear the sound, it still exists. But then I also have an assumption or take the stance of maybe because at the end of the day, ultimately, who knows? So it's just kind of conflicting for me between yes and maybe. So, something that a few of the different areas that you can think about when discussing this question is what is someone? Is someone a human? Is someone an animal? Is someone an insect? Because when we think about a forest, there's a lot of different uh, things or living species that come into play in the forest. There could be humans around, there could be animals, insects, as I stated, fishes in the water, bacteria in the air. There's all types of different organisms and molecules present in the forest, although they exist at different levels of consciousness. So when we're asking this question, we need to figure out, well, what exactly is someone? So that's something that plays into the factor of the answer to this question. And then what is a sound? So a sound is a vibration that transfers through a medium, and that medium can be air, which that's what it would be if a tree was falling, but it can also be the ground that the tree is planted into. A medium can also be material such as metal, water, different things like that. And then, in order for a sound to exist, it needs a receiver to acknowledge the sound. So that brings us back to the question of, well, what exactly is someone? Um, is this a person receiving the sound? Could could it be valid if an animal receives the sound? So these sound vibrations send signals to the brain um, to ultimately hear the sound. So if a physical person isn't there for those vibrations to go through the ear and hit the cochlea and send those neurotransmitters to the brain to say, I just heard a sound, does the sound actually exist? Therefore, is a sound only a sound if a person hears it? What about an animal? Many animals actually have a wider range of hearing than humans. They can hear different higher pitched or lower pitched sounds that humans ultimately cannot hear. So, are we as humans, why do we feel that the sound only exists if a human hears it, when ultimately animals have a wider range of sound that they can receive? Does that, make them even more valid than a human? Who knows? So, if we take this scenario and we say, for instance, okay, let's pretend that there's no humans around and there's no animals around. Okay, well, there's also insects. And insects can also hear sounds, although they may not exist at a higher level of consciousness like people and animals may do. They can still hear these sounds. So if they're around, that indicates that the tree is still making a sound because they can hear it. So let's say, for instance, there's no humans, no animals, and no insects. Well, there are studies that have shown that plants can respond to sound. So if the tree fell, there's no humans, no animals, and no insects. Neighboring trees and plants and even the leaves on the tree itself can ultimately respond to different sounds. So I definitely believe that this is possible. And even relating back to animals, I have a cat and he loves music. Anytime I turn on music, he comes, closer to the source of the sound because he likes to listen to music. And I have a lot of different plants in my apartment. Here's one. And sometimes when I leave for the day, I'll, leave on a YouTube video of like a nice low melody or a nice sound for my cats and my plants to listen to while I'm not around, because it has been said that when plants experience the vibrations of the sound, it helps them to grow. So, who knows how true that is, but I believe that, since being that plants are living organisms, I do believe this to be true. So, all that is to say that if there were no plants, if there were no humans, animals, or insects, neighboring plants or neighboring flowers on the ground and things like that would hear or experience this tree falling. So let's say, for instance, there are no humans, animals, or insects. Well, as I mentioned before, there's still bacteria and microorganisms surrounding this tree. So, for instance, if the tree was just a lonely tree in the middle of the Sahara Desert, then the air surrounding the tree would still hear the tree falling, and so would the bacteria and different microorganisms, the stuff in the air. And in fact, sound has been proven to affect the growth rate of E. coli bacteria. So even though we would consider bacteria to be incoherent, that bacteria would still be able to experience or hear sound. As I stated before about neighboring plants being able to hear and experience sound, if there were no other neighboring plants, animals, insects, bacteria, the tree itself, if it has leaves on it, etc., can experience or hear its own self fall. So it can essentially interact with itself. So ultimately, I believe that the remaining question is, if observation has an effect on reality. And I feel like that's where I stand, in the in between of yes and also maybe, because I am a believer that observation has no effect on reality. So if I wasn't in this room right now and my cat started doing backflips, I would have no knowledge of that, but that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. So I feel like I also stand on the stance of maybe, because no matter how ridiculous that might sound, who knows? If I wasn't there to see it myself, who knows what was going on behind those closed doors. So I just feel like this is a really fun, critical thinking question to observe with third graders. As I've stated, I was introduced to this question in middle school, so it might go a little beyond their knowledge, but just to get, those thinkers, churning in their brains, I feel like it would be a good question to introduce to them. And as for diverse learners, I feel like for students with disabilities, it would be a good idea to introduce this question through video. Some students with disabilities respond better to reading things written down on paper, or they may have to use Braille, or, on the computer, they might require different types of assistive technology. So that would be a way that I could get together with my students of disability so that they would be able to be engaged with this question as well. And for English language learners, I feel like it would be a good idea for this topic to introduce the prompt to them in their native language, and then allow them to be in a small target group where they can discuss this prompt in their native language, and then come up with a way to express their views on this prompt in English. So that would be a good way for them to be thinking both in their native language and also English at the same time. And then lastly, for advanced learners, I would probably get even more into the scientific aspect of this question for the scenario analysis, and just diving more into the scientific reasoning behind the different points that I discussed here, because I feel like advanced learners would have the capability and the higher sense of curiosity to want to know more about the science behind this, how the sound vibrations work in the ear, and what are the different parts, the different kind of animals, what are the different kind of sound waves that they can interpret and hear. All animals are different and can hear different pitches of sound, similar to humans. So yeah, I feel like that's how I would address a diversity of learners in my class. So thank you for listening to my critical thinking topic. Again, the question was, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, does it still make a sound? Good question, and people still can't seem to agree on the answer to this day. All right, take care.